about whether they could make a go of it and whether this community would be a successful community. Much the same worries as probably the organizing committee has had over the last year as to whether the weather would hold, as to whether things would all fall together as beautifully and wonderfully as they have. Before we start this worship service, I would like to again thank you for being here and thank Reverend Crosby for coming to share words with us. And I want you to know, since you're bound to be a little worried, I already told him that you were well used to 45-minute sermons and that he shouldn't change one little bit. Now, there is one other thing, Nimrod. I'm told that over here in Presbyterian history was where the elders sat. Now, in very early Presbyterian churches, you didn't always have music, but the elders would sit over here and line the hymns for the congregation. So, Nimrod, we're expecting great things from you this afternoon. Let us come together with our call to worship. If you have a bulletin or if you're near a bulletin, of the immigrants from Scotland. They must bid farewell to their hills and glens, to relatives and friends, but their deep feeling for the church was brought here with them. History records the gathering of the colonists, the farewell signals, how they, as they came along on the train, handkerchiefs were waved from households, people lined the railways to bid them farewell. All along that journey by train to Glasgow, onto the banks of the Clyde River, where they would embark on the steamship Castalia for the now unknown land. The colonists had hoped to bring a minister of the Presbyterian faith with them. Reverend Bullock of Kintore, Scotland, had agreed to join the colonists as their spiritual leader, but just a few days prior to his departure, he had to cancel his plans due to personal reasons. Though the colonists sailed without a minister, the Presbyterian Church in New Brunswick gave prompt and almost continual support to this place. In 1874, the second group of colonists arrived. They came to Kintore. Once more, no minister was with them. Owing to the difficulties and disappointments experienced on arrival, no schools or churches were built for 3 years, but the children were taught and religious meetings were held in private homes or vacant log homes because some of the settlers did not stay in their homes. They couldn't cope with the hardships. It was the duty of the man of the house to lead the service of worship each Sabbath as all the neighbors gathered, likely to give thanks for survival. And I feel sure to ask help from God in their struggle to endure and to provide daily necessities of life. Ministers were sent on a regular basis to the colony, but the first to stay and work for any length of time among them was Reverend Peter Melville, from whom this church is named. He believed that if the colony was to develop permanent roots, better education and religious services were required. Something better than just spontaneous classes and services held in vacant homes. Under his leadership, financial assistance from the home missions was received, and the congregation had saved a small amount of money. At last, it was decided to go ahead with their project. They were going to see about building schools and churches. The meeting was called at Lower Kintore, dated August 21st, 1876. The building committee and school trustees were duly appointed from the 4 districts assembled. Some of the notes that I have tell me that there was Mr. Watt, Mr. Lingham, Mr. Barclay, Watson. There's more names than that, but I can't think of them now. They gathered to make the decision. They decided to build 4 schools, 1 in each district: Upper Stonehaven, Lower Stonehaven, Upper and Lower Kintore. And they built just 1 church for the whole colony, to serve the whole colony at that time, and this is the church that they built. Construction began at once. Schools must serve as churches until later. This church was dedicated on January 1st, 1878. On September the 3rd, 1893, the Upper Kintore Church was dedicated. I have no record of the date in which the Lower Kintore Church was dedicated, but surely that record might be somewhere. If anyone knows, I would really appreciate them telling me that, because I'd like to keep it among my notes to be passed on in future years. The Lower Kintore Church is now closed. There never was a church in Bonnecourt. They worship in the schoolhouse. Mr. Thomas Watt wrote to the Surveyor General, "Though we ourselves generally dwell in log homes, yet our schools and our churches must be goodly edifices, better built, larger, for the convenience of religion and for bigger groups." In 1895, a committee, Mr. Paul, Mr. Adam, Mr. Barclay, Mr. Watt, Mr. Lettingham, located and made plans for, located a spot and made plans for building a manse. They organized donations of money, material, and planned labor for the construction. In 1896, a leader from the homeland arrived to occupy the manse, and was to be the leader of the churches in the colony for 56 years. And I'm sure you all know who I mean, because I too knew Mr. Pringle. And I well remember when we first moved here, our second son was, I guess, the only child ever born up in the house way back in behind the manse. And quite some time before his arrival, Mr. Pringle came over, called my husband outside and told him to be sure to come to his house to call the doctor and say it done. Now, Reverend Dr. Pringle, his ministry was not only one from the pulpit, but also a very personal one that included everyone in the settlement. He soon became a familiar figure on the roads. In winter he traveled with horse and sleigh, and he wore a heavy raccoon fur coat, a fur cap, and an oven-heated stone in the bottom of the sleigh to keep his feet from freezing. In summer, he traveled by horse and buggy. The horse, many of you forget, was named Harry, and I now remember Harry. Reverend Dr. Pringle served this colony until the time of his death in 1956. This church was at first a Presbyterian kirk, but in 1925 it was decided to join in the Union. of the Methodist, Congregational, and Presbyterian. And then this became Melville United Church. Some at first sort of opposed joining in the union, but Mr. Pringle suggested if they didn't, this church would be isolated, because all around us, the churches would be united. This would be the only one with Presbyterian. Therefore, the people were persuaded, and I believe that the vote was unanimous. Dr. Pringle's years of service to this community are still remembered with gratitude. He kept detailed records of his congregation and all happenings in the colony. These are the records which provide us with a detailed history of our church and our community today. There are many others who have served and led his church and congregation. All are worthy of mention. Time doesn't permit it.
I'd like to read from the 11th chapter of Hebrews. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he set out, not knowing where he was going. Here ends our epistle reading. Join me please, and we'll sing hymn number 380.